grab a drink. It's time for another episode of Off the Record, On the Rocks. Join Michael Toner and Ankarina Lara as we discuss the latest in all things Web3, AI, metaverse, and crypto. Tune out the noise and turn up the signal as we pour ourselves into the future. Better make mine a double.
The remarks by Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen announcing the new Treasury action against illicit finance with Garland, Attorney General Garland. These guys collecting $4 billion. So this was like the bury it into Thanksgiving. The press release is dated November 21st. So I had to think about it. I had to go back in my head and be like, what was that thing? What was that thing that we were talking about? Right before going into Thanksgiving? And that's right. It was about CZ and Binance. And then I'm like, okay, let me see what's going on with CZ. Here's today. Yeah. Bloomberg at 11:06 a.m. Eastern, November 28th, exactly 7 days. So you had pre-finance 4Bs, and yeah, you got post-Thanksgiving. CZ steps down as Binance U.S. chair in fallout of DOJ settlement. Zhao has transferred his Binance.US voting rights via a proxy, relinquished his global CEO role in DOJ plea deal. So here comes the rest of the news, right? Bury the lead before Thanksgiving. We collected our 4Bs, we won, and let him take the I'm stepping down. And that's the headline that everyone, CZ stepping down from Binance. Not he paid $4 billion to the U.S. government. That part is gone. That part is
no one wants to be keeping track, right, of how many Bs the U.S. government has collected over the last 2 years, right? They love promoting the stuff about shaking down celebrities, right? A few 100,000 from Soulja Boy. A million or two from Kim Kardashian and the Kardashians generally. Those stories are the ones that pop. Everyone loves a story about a celebrity.
Tom Brady got wrapped up in it.
Tom Brady got wrapped up in it. Paul Pierce, Shaquille O'Neal. Remember they're trying to serve him papers? He's got body doubles running around Atlanta. And then, wait a second. When it's the billions, we like to, let's just go ahead and hide that detail. Let's talk about celebrities in the few hundred thousands and a few million, but the billions, I agree, they buried it. Another story that got buried.
What's his name anyway? CZ? I don't even know how to pronounce it. Who's this guy?
They buried right? This one too. I think I sent you. This one came out, I want to say, just on Thanksgiving. So this is one where you talk about burying it.
Working over the holidays.
You want to talk about burying it in the stuffing and just jacking it in the bird and burning it up. Everyone's laughed it off. Well, guess what I read on Thanksgiving as I was waiting for the roast to get finished is that homeboy CZ posts a nearly, I want to say it was close to a $200 million bail bond.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Headed to Montenegro.
He gets out. Well, not Montenegro, because that's where Do Kwon went and got picked up. He was the South Korean from Terra Luna. So CZ is he's Chinese by birth, but I want to say he's Canadian. I think he's a Canadian citizen, which is also interesting and potentially why Xi Jinping and China aren't really stepping in to protect in any way or say anything, because he's not really
a Chinese national.
He's not Chinese national. He's Canadian. But the thing that got me was underneath that line of the 200 or whatever the amount, 200 million bail, was he is in fact going to get sentenced. And surprise, surprise, everyone. When should we schedule the sentencing for CZ? I have an idea. How about right before or after Trump, or should we go before or after Sam Bankman-Fried? I don't know. Just put it into the end of February, early March, just before the halvening, because we have to have all of these guys.
It's all got to be cleaned up
before the halvening, before the Bitcoin ETF, and before BlackRock and ARK and Grayscale all come rolling out products across Wells Fargo and Fidelity and everybody else. But talk about burying it, man. When you sent me that link, I was like, what? Oh, they're having a press conference on Wednesday? And then when I saw that CZ was out on bail on Thanksgiving, I mean, man, these guys are professionals.
$4 billion is not in the works in the weeks leading up to the deal, in the weeks leading up to a press conference the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. All it serves, the purpose is we worked up until we went on holiday. We worked right up until the last minute, and then we took ourselves a little vacay. But that 4B has been in the pipeline for years. The working with the regulators to arrive at that number, to know where the accounts came from, to know how much was transferred as securities versus illegal securities, and what the penalty was going to be for doing that, which is super interesting. The other thing that catches my attention post Thanksgiving is this post Thanksgiving news about the SEC in a Supreme Court ruling about to lose their tribunals, about to lose their private court, their private regulation, the council of Genslers that decide whether something is a security or not. And so now all of a sudden, these things, this narrative starts to really intersect, starts to really make sense when you're talking about $4 billion fine for selling securities, selling cryptocurrency, but not adhering to the securities rules. And those securities rules and the SEC, the way that they've yielded that power, being very inconsistent with no clear guidelines. And now that's making its way through the Supreme Court. This is breaking today. I don't know how we've missed this moving through the pipeline, but they may lose their ability to exercise this secret regulatory power.
Yeah, so we had talked about in way episodes past when Gary Gensler first started appearing in front of Congress. This goes back now to, it's almost a full 12 months. I feel like we've gone through almost an annual cycle where Gary Gensler's name is everywhere. He's at the press club talking to people, ultimately with you. He's dropping CTFC and by accident with SEC and these different groups that he works with. We learned, I think, through Senator McHenry's grilling of him, that, and I don't think he said, judge, jury, and executioner, but it was something along those lines where he's like, hey, you guys operate this like paramilitary version of a court. You're judge, jury, and tax collector. Or like extortionist, he might have said. There was some term he used, which was brutal, which is true. And then the question became, we talked about, it's like, well, can't McHenry and these guys just replace him? Like, isn't this an appointment? And so now I guess we're learning that maybe it isn't quite so simple, because clearly the Supreme Court getting involved and having to answer that question suggests that this is one of those topics that isn't. I mean, Gary apparently is very, very difficult to get out of whatever recess he's hiding himself in. He has a very good hold on whatever his rule set are that keep him in that position. Because clearly he's been going around extorting library. Remember library? Just shutting down some poor
LBRY.
Just LBRY, some random project that no one's even heard of. And then going over here and getting this money and all this stuff. And maybe Gensler was allowed to have that leash because he was making money.
I've got a serious hot take, meaning this is a massive power shift. This is a massive, massive power shift that cannot be underestimated. So this is from Bloomberg today. The justices are due to hear arguments in the appeal by President Joe Biden's administration of a lower court's ruling restricting the SEC's power to enforce securities laws through the agency's longstanding in-house tribunal system. What you just described as Gary Gensler's stronghold on this regulatory body is all about the structure, the governance, if you will, of who owns and controls the power inside of the federal government. Now, that's super interesting to talk about ownership and to talk about power and to talk about governance. Because the other thing that got slammed up the turkey's rear end before Thanksgiving that people are still trying to figure out and was the topic around the turkey table is the governance structure around the open AI. I know we make all kinds of connections and dots, but I've talked about this. I've said it so many times that if you can solve the regulation around the artificial intelligence, then by default, you will have solved the regulation around crypto and blockchain and the financial markets that it can power. Now, here we go. The SEC's got this crazy governance structure. It's not really Gary Gensler just himself. It's this tribunal system. I don't know who's in charge. It's the same type of governance structure that we're talking about now with Microsoft and OpenAI and these private companies. I mean,
so Satya Nadella plus Sam Altman plus Xi Jinping's delegation are part of a tribunal to govern AI decision making as it starts getting rolled out across the two superpowers.
I mean,
I think you're onto something there, because honestly, it is very difficult to find the exact due process that exists or doesn't exist in a tribunal system, because tribunals versus courts have existed for a long time. It's private, and people often confuse like going into arbitrage as somehow being like a tribunal, but that's actually court related. Tribunals are something different, where there really isn't a group of your peers by any stretch of the imagination involved. In fact, there's a small number of people with very specific interests who are meaning to steer legislation or rules certain directions. Now, if I were a betting man, I might say that the tribunal could include, I don't know, representatives of BlackRock. Is it possible for other private company type people?
How do you get on this tribunal? They sound like shadowy regulators in their basement regulating.
There they are. You see them? They're like this, and they just extort money. But the part of the tribunal thing that you just kind of keyed in on, it is that model. It is that model, because if we know that the United States Supreme Court and the danger and the power and everything else that's always been in discussion now, especially for the last 4, 5, 10 years, is there too much power, right? Do the justices of 9 with lifetime positions, is it too much? There's been talks of expanding it, changing term lengths, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, what we're saying is that the highest court in the world, let's just be brash Americans, but the most powerful, highest court in the world is now going to hear a case about one of maybe the most powerful I can't even say the word, tribunals in the world.
Right.
Is that what's happening? So then if that establishes precedent, if the Supreme Court makes a decision, they call that establishing a precedent. And now, what would be the next thing you'd want to come talk about against that precedent? Governing AI. And look, we already got that covered with SEC and crypto, and we can overlay. So maybe we are seeing the initial bricks being laid in the road. They're going to take us all the way down to Xanadu.
The two parallel storylines to me, and I think part of that comes out of my own knowledge of Web3 over the last two years, really, of studying decentralized technologies, decentralized ownership, what NFTs really represented. I mean, look at the Thanksgiving Day parade. The cool cat was going down the boulevard, and you've got Savannah Guthrie up there saying this is the first non-fungible token project to ever make its way into physical form in the Macy's Day Parade. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying that big balloon that millions and millions and millions and millions of people are seeing can be fractionalized. The ownership of it, the licensing of that balloon, which maybe costs $100,000, everybody gets $10 into their digital wallet. That's a very hard concept to explain. But here you've got this first brick being laid on NBC during the Thanksgiving Day parade, right as the true power shift is happening, that changing definition of ownership. I don't know what it is about the Beaver Moon and where we're sitting here in November, but something really tells me that all the work that has to get in, the fix is in. Whatever's happening in 2024, we're post-Thanksgiving. So all the predictions we're making now are going to send us all the way till next December. And I think the groundwork that's being laid is we need to empower brands to have some sort of fractional ownership. It needs to be powered by blockchain. Why not? Why would we not use the sophisticated real-time payment solution, global settlement, real-time payments? They are. It's called FedNow. It's happening. Okay, what's the missing piece? Well, we need regulation for our publicly traded companies, for our 401ks. Our biggest asset managers need to be able to trade in this stuff. BlackRock ETF queued up for March. Gensler, Supreme Court ruling queued up for March. Nutella, OpenAI, all of that stuff is going to be solved. Whoever owns that IP, whoever's going to get to deploy it and be the solution for this regulation. It all just makes sense to me that this is the power shift that's happening. And I think we've just witnessed it. If I had to put a marker, if we look back 10 years from now, I think this weekend, this 2023 Thanksgiving will be the marker of that shift in the financial markets, in the regulatory markets, in the economy for the next decade.
Yeah, and I'll even piggyback on top of that, which is the underlying all of this, because we try to parse a lot of intrigue on the show. We talk through and like look at tea leaves, as we say, like to look between the lines, digging into old SEC.gov posts and looking at their post dates just to know really when were these folks thinking about this, even though they, on days like the day before Thanksgiving, they're able to just mount these massive, meetings of people that clearly have been scheduled for months. Yet it kind of seems like it's happening in real time. But underneath all of the intrigue and all the excitement and all the obfuscation and all of the confusion and delay is that the government has been on a slow march, the feds, since Fed Now was announced, which this goes back to like April, May of this year, and starts to go, which is, okay, we're going to start to walk down every path. We talked about this, going to every door and knocking and saying, you are in the wrong and you need to pay us a fine. And in most cases, it was, you're in the wrong for talking about this on Twitter or on X or on Instagram. And now you have to pay a fine. So they go through all the people that are easy. You talked about stuff you shouldn't have, give us some money, and then you go away. Okay, now on to the next. Then we're like, okay, what's the next thing going to be? Stable coins, right? Well, stable coins, they threaten the American dollar. If America is going to have a dollar, it's called either USDC or it's called, Fed Now coin or whatever it's called. Hey, everything that's not that is a competitor. So let's make sure we go down the line and knock them out. Let's go get Ripple. Let's go get all these different guys, right? Now it's, okay, who sold any of this stuff in a broad sense? And who has not fabulously crashed and burned? Okay, we got our friends over at Kraken. We got our friend over at Binance, CZ. We're probably going to go see the Gemini twins who run, the Winklevoss twins who run Gemini. Yep. I mean, every single one of these places that you could have acquired a security illegally is going to go away. So the underlying theme can be next year, again, right around that Feb, March, April, is going to be, hey, all the stuff that you've heard about in the past, well, that was all illegal. There were criminals who were running this. Now we've learned and we've shut down all that bad stuff. So you retail investor, you consumer can have the confidence to start to reinvest all that money that you want to invest in the products and services that the government says are okay. Now, one last data point on that it's been hanging with me, is there's one other major thing coming right in April that we haven't really talked about much, which is Apple Vision Pro. And the new
metaverse about to launch.
Vision Pro, the new metaverse that will tie together everything you and I just said. Ownership and partial ownership of digital and physical, instantiating of new metaverses, AI governing your experience in those places. Hey, all of that, we can't let you see that. I'm Tim Cook. I can't hand you those goggles yet. We're not ready for this yet. You're not ready for what you're about to see. We're going to wait until April, until after the halvening, after all these things slide, after everything is done, and then now here are your goggles. Now you can explore. Now you can wanderlust.
Think again, about I feel like a consumer product. I mean, Tim Cook, these guys have to know, not just those little letters that show on the box that this battery is approved, but every little piece of payment regulation that goes into the experience that you're describing that we all know is coming. This generative AI. When you said AI driven regulation, I mean, I went to the place of, we've talked about identity and owning my identity and knowing that it's me, but I can show up, in my dinosaur costume in augmented reality, but you with zero knowledge would know that it's me, that it's my username, that it's my trusted avatar, my persona, my voice, that it's that ownership of identity. Apple had to have been helping to solve, no doubt, the quietest of all.
Maybe they're on the tribunal and we don't even know it.
We may not even know.
Because look, I'll rewind it back to, let's talk about 2007 and 2008. This takes people way, way back. But what was important about those years was it was the beginning of what we know as the smartphone, which pretty much became the defined shape, soap bar size shape screen that would then become the first iPhone that would then set the blueprint for every smartphone manufacturer really going forward, with the exception of these folding clamshell ones or whatever. But ultimately, it opens up to a big soap bar screen.
Yeah, there's a form factor.
When that launched, there was a kerfuffle. And I don't know if you remember this, but the iPhone launched, but because of various government conversations, I can't remember if it was FTC or CFTC or whatever it was, but what they were introducing was an app store. And the App Store was going to start to take a marketplace, and they were going to start to take micropayments. And at the time, the payments were small payments for apps,
99
cents. or this new notion, which is the app is free, but it's freemium, and then you can install it for free, and then you can buy things later on. Sometimes it's a game, sometimes it's not. That held up the App Store rollout.
Yes,
I want to say for 9 months after the handset was out. Handset came out, I can't remember if it was the fall. I think it was October when it got into retailers' hands, retail investors' hands, consumers. But I want to say the App Store didn't launch till that following, end of summer, early fall. And I think that was a miss. Apple does not want to have a smartphone in people's hands that have apps, and yet there's no way to get more apps, right? It was this little locked thing with the 12 icons.
They do not want the next day headline to be like, regulators shut down new Apple Vision Pro due to payment concerns in the metaverse. That would be a disaster.
And how about there's actually no legal way to buy or sell anything in this new metaverse? So you give someone this thing like, hey, here's the metaverse. By the way, don't touch anything, because if you break it, you bought it. They don't want to have that be the narrative. So they're going to wait right the right time.
I get chills. What we just described, it's a new marketplace, a new environment, a new world, a digital layer that you can transact in. And as we've pieced together and dissected all of what transpired with Web3 and the tokenization of these digital assets and all the brands that experimented and tried, here comes Apple piecing together that payments piece, the hardware piece, and the software experience that we know is going to be necessary for people to want to be in it. And I'm not saying I'm going to be in it all the time. Look, I'm very conscious of my screen time. I get the weekly reports. I know how much time I'm spending in this alternate universe. I'm
TLDR.
I'm watching how much time my kids spend in it. But at the end of the day, I'm going to spend time, and as will you, and we all will, in this next version of that, this more immersive experience where these digital products, these digital worlds, these generative AI, experiences can exist around us in real time. I can create it. I can prompt it. I can pay for it. That 99 cents is maybe me saying, I'd like to sit in a spa with relaxing sound with Austin Powers playing on the TV in front of me, right? Boom, done. Instant. I'm willing to pay 99 cents for that kind of relaxation. But any experience you can think of instantaneously delivered to you in that new world, of course, they have to wait for all these regulations to get sorted out. It is related to real-time payments and blockchain technology. And is this digital asset a security? Yes or no, Mr. Tribunal?
And if you were going to speak one more thing, when Apple comes out, because they've already said, we're already expecting it, right? April-ish 2024. And we already know that they've been eating crow for more than a decade, because they got an iPhone out, but there was no app store, and there was no promise of doing your Wells Fargo, your Bank of America banking on an app, because the store wasn't available yet. Everyone had to wait, and they couldn't really tell the whole story as to why this was important. So now let's just say we leave that in the past, our old mistakes. Well, what would be a great thing? So how about first prediction for the next year is, what would be a great thing is when you put on your Vision Pro goggles, and it just coincides pretty close to, say, I don't know, April 15th, that maybe FedNow with Jesse Chang's avatar is one of the first things you can interact with, and you can talk to your IRS agent right away and just help file your taxes through the FedNow experience, which will be totally unique. And, one of those first apps in store in the metaverse. And if we see either FedNow, IRS.gov, we can go down a list of acronyms, but if we see just one of those apps as whatever they're going to end up calling it, an app, an experience, a verse, whatever the thing is in this new world, I'm assuming it'll be an app. If one of those is there, then I think we'll know that Apple at least has some representatives on whatever tribunal to make sure they are in lockstep
Right.
So that the average
There's
consumer
no
is
miss
going
here.
to tap a button, and my Goldman Sachs Apple savings account is going to move some digital currency into my metaverse, and I'm going to be able to send off my taxes free of charge. Remember, it's free now. And then I'm going to go and I'll be able to start becoming a part owner of all kinds of interesting digital assets in this new wanderlust that I navigate
Or
through.
immediately roll over your refund into that high interest savings account. I mean,
That's right. It's
yeah,
right. But Apple, we all know, what's the number one thing that people think of with Apple? Is we think of security, we think of privacy, we think of family accounts and management control guardrails.
trust
If you were
for
going to
sure.
align, if you were anyone in technology or the government and wanted to align yourself with a direct to consumer channel, it would stand to reason that that would be Apple, the leader right now. Because as it is now, you can't. I mean, literally, the people I know, they don't trust their kids on any other device because they don't have any of the governance that they have. It's obvious.
And if we're talking about trust and we're talking about content and we're talking about ownership, and I'm a parent and my kid's going to go into any of this new virtual world and I'm going to use an Apple hardware device, what content do I want them consuming? I want them consuming family-friendly content brought to you by our pal Mickey Mouse and Bob Iger and Disney. And this prediction, to me, is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. I have not heard a peep. I have not heard a rumor blog. I have not seen a tweet or an X, whatever we're calling them today. But I'm more and more seeing the synergies between that content ownership, those content experiences. I can't walk into this experience day one and not have some, like Disney Plus will be available on Apple Vision Pro day one, right? I don't care if they acquire them or not. Disney Plus, you heard it here first. And if I'm wrong, I'll eat whatever I have to. But I guarantee you Disney Plus is going to work day one. So that cascading of content, ownership, transactions, trust, privacy, regulation environment to create this new market. And I'm not just talking about Apple Vision Pro. I know we're zeroing in on Apple, but Meta's going to benefit from this. Google's going to benefit from this. The consumer is going to benefit ultimately, I believe, from having these more immersive experiences. But it is going to need a lot of education here around decentralized finance, blockchain. I think the narrative we'll hear in 2024 about, my 401k now has access to cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like that'll be the commercial where our police officers and our teachers and our firefighters and folks who work hard every day and have a 401k are going to hear that and feel and should feel good, right? About, yes, there are going to be a new asset class that's going to be introduced to more retail friendly investments, things like a retirement account. But they're not, you don't own it. And there's a different way that I don't think we've covered enough here in terms of your keys, your crypto, and really, like, what does that mean for self-governance and
and that's actually, that's a segue, right? Because whenever you hear Congress speak in a negative way about something, my expectation is always that, well, this is setting up, this is the foil that's being set up to tell me why the new thing that they're going to tell me is the right thing. Similar to like everything we've seen, right? Well, if these criminals from Voyager and Celsius and Terra Luna and FTX and these Ponzi schemes are doing crypto in a way that is bad, and I'm going to show you they're going to go to jail, they're going to pay fines, these are criminals, then the new thing that I show you over here, called the Bitcoin ETF or called, your latest microtransaction approved for you by Apple, is a good thing, right? We're always just showing you the bad thing earlier, so that when I then bring the good thing, you're like, oh, thank you so much for bringing the good thing. So a lot of this stuff you're talking about, this privacy, this family protections, right now there is a lot of noise. Talk about people not being quiet. You have Congress, you have the PR team scrambling over at our friends at Meta, right? You've had Meta coming out screaming and yelling about, we threw out the old schematics for our headset and we're gonna do a lot of the stuff that Apple's doing. It's like, yeah, no duh. Everyone's gonna do a lot of the stuff that the number one privacy hardware manufacturer is doing. And as I think about that, well, gosh, in the news right now, we're hearing Mark Zuckerberg knew for months, if not years, the negative effects of spending too much time on social media for children of a certain age. Now we're hearing news stories which are saying that they also, not only that, but they didn't do anything to prevent under 13-year-olds from registering as 13-year-olds and continuing to use all their services. So if you start
Those
to create
commercials
this
were
entire,
everywhere, all over Thanksgiving. Everywhere.
I saw it everywhere, right? So now we're setting up for next year. Okay, social media as a concept is bad. And the companies that are running these social media platforms are not doing a good enough job of protecting you. Well, who needs to help? How about the government and Apple? Because we have mechanisms, we, the government, Apple, to make it so that all these bad things that are happening in social won't happen to your children. We're going to find a way to put guardrails on social, the same way we put guardrails on content and apps in our app store. When you can't get access to a 17 plus app, Apple knows because mom can look at the phone and see all the kids' ages, and that by software default runs out and controls all their devices. Gosh, wouldn't that be nice if you could do that and have it go into Facebook or into Instagram or into TikTok?
Like a digital passport.
And a passport that then filters all that stuff based on an AI algorithm, which looks at not only visual content, but audio content and language. And suddenly you don't need humans going in and having to, at the app store saying, well, I don't know, this is a 13 plus app or a 15 plus app. It does use the D word and part of it. There's a lot of consternation around stuff like that. Even the MPAA giving ratings to movies, just to bring it to a more pedestrian example. Humans watch movies and fill out little cards and turn it in and they give it scores.
Like, this is 13, this is PG.
Yeah, but that changes over time based on what the culture says. So I think there's going to be this interesting thing, which will be, we're going to see a pillory where we'll be able to walk out in the street and we're going to see all these social media guys in the shackles and we're going to be throwing tomatoes in their face because the new technology is actually going to protect us from all the nefarious actors that live in these places. And as soon as we all buy into that rhetoric, will spontaneity die? Will we be able to stumble upon anything anymore? Or will everything be so curated that we'll be fed what Apple and Disney and a few other major players say is okay? I'm starting to feel like maybe this might be the end next year of what people refer to as the wild, wild west of the internet. This could be the actual end year. Because if you don't have access to a device that can get you where you want to go, well, then you can't go anywhere.
Yeah. No, I went to a place about X and the ownership, and I saw something today, Elon talking about community notes as being this ultimate solution to truth in social media, and calling it out today specifically, saying that it's the thing he thinks is going to ultimately differentiate what he's building. And so he's fine with these advertisers leaving. And I played through a couple scenarios of like, he's getting to the end of the year. Maybe he doesn't need any more revenue for this company. He wants to write it off as a loss. So fine, for the rest of the year, we don't need advertisers. At the same time, I think there's probably a lot of hate speech, a lot of anti-Semitism, all the bad stuff that you're hearing happening on X, I do believe is there. And I think the thing that I at least try to wrestle with is that as long as these are not bots, if Elon can prove that these are real humans and they're paying the $8 a month and they're still making this kind of hate speech, then do we want them not saying it, or do we want them to be community noted? Do you want it to surface enough to where people can call it out? And I think that's kind of fundamentally what you're getting at is, do I trust an algorithm to do that if I don't understand how the model works? Or do I trust just the algorithm is us, humans, to filter each other and call out bad behavior when we hear it? And that's, I think, the approach that Elon is taking. At the end of the day, it's crazy to think that we just start blurring all of these things around ownership and blockchain technology and then bring it around to free speech. But that, I think, is a fundamental tenet and probably at the core of what makes so much of this conversation more complicated, is that not every country can have this open of a dialogue as you and I have for the past several years about the US dollar and our currency and how we transact and our leaders and private companies and our federal government and how it all works together. It's messy. It's really messy, but I don't know where I was going with that other than Elon and community notes.
Well, in Elon, and so like again, I just to bring it back to sort of my thesis or maybe it's a fear even is that what we've seen over the last couple of decades is there is a dovetailing between what is the digital world and the physical world. So much so that there's even a term which is called phygital to describe this intersection and how do we manage it. And now we're seeing it in these other ways that aren't like, okay, I take a handbag and I hold it, but then in the metaverse, my character wears it. Like those are sort of the simple ways of describing phygital or physical and digital. But now we're seeing legislation which has physical ramifications, right? There are children who are suffering from mental illness, a physical challenge because of a digital experience. And so when I start thinking about regulation,
really blurred.
And now we're talking about governance, is the governance, phygital in a way? Because there are going to be the physical rails that kind of either restrict me to accessing stuff or will force me to access certain things. And then there's the digital, which is, well, how then are we going to govern and manage it? How are we going to, are humans in the physical world going to do that? Or are we over time going to have to cede some level of this kind of tribunal regulation to digital, right? Today, tribunal regulation means a bunch of people sitting around a table or however many they are, I wouldn't even know. And they're making decisions. Well, maybe in the future, part of this is that in real time, we're going to need to have almost a tribunal, if you will, of AI that's going to have to make a decision, because we all think about AI as being a singular thing. And that's like what everyone's afraid of. Singularity is going to make it all wake up, and then we'll have Skynet and the Terminator, and then we're all dead. But what if there's as many AIs as there are metaverses, as there are, cryptocurrency tokens? And what if a tribunal could have an AI from China, an AI from Microsoft, an AI from OpenAI, an AI for the UK, and there's actually like a Supreme Court-esque group of AIs who are working together to solve the digital space, and then the humans can sort of solve that physical space. And I don't really have an end point to this thought, except that it really does feel like we're in a scenario where all the powers that be, to bring it all the way back down to the very most basic example, is, the Pebble. Is the Pebble even still exist? Those wristbands that track your steps, or an Apple Watch, whatever your wearable is that tracks where you go. Lots of parents today like the idea of being able to see where their child is at all times, or be able to have a button on that device where you tap it and you can talk to your emergency contact, your parent. But what's missing from that? Well, I need my device to have a little easy way for my kid to buy stuff in the physical world that I can sort of track and everything else. And these devices that we wear, we carry them in our pockets every day. We carry a watch, a phone, credit cards, we have friends we talk to, whatever. Well, our children, as we're raising them, there isn't like any of those trappings of physical really anymore. They just need a single little beacon to basically do everything they want to, not only in the metaverse, but as it turns out, in the full physical world. And now that we have basically decided that the physical world is less physical and more digital, then so needs the government to just step in like hard into this digital world and do what they do in the physical world. Like, yeah, in the digital world, someone's going to come knock on your door and like fine you, because that's how they do it in the physical world. Like the fact that they still have to run around and serve papers to a human who's running around different countries, hiding from people, yet we can see them doing stuff online. I mean, we really are only, I think, a few months, if not a year away from the government, its reach to be basically ubiquitous. Like, as it is today, you can hide, but that's going away. And everything the government is doing is merging digital and physical, so that while it seems like it's an amazing benefit to all of us consumers, it actually just is going to be this massive increased level of AI-driven governance and control of all the things that we do in our world. And yet we will happily do it for the convenience and just kind of keep walking down this road brick by brick. That to me is maybe my fear for where we're headed next year.
we are going to leave it on your fear for next year, but we will do it again next week, sir. I'll catch you next week right here, same time, same place.
I'll talk to you then. Keep your windows closed.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Off the Record, on the Rocks. Join us next week for more news on all things Web3. Check, please.